The White Knight. Such a vile little creature. Contemptible in the eyes of women and men alike. The White Knight goes out looking for a lady fair to defend. He feeds into her solipsism, feeding her delusions about how beautiful she is and praising her every decision. When she makes a wreck of her own life, when she pursues a man who's out of her league and then blames it on that man being cruel to her, he turns against his fellow man, with no thoughts of justice, no thoughts of truth, and no thoughts to the fact that he's feeding into her own delusion, leading to her own ruin. The White Knight is the beta male. He begs women for their approval and seeks to defend their honor. Like most forms of degeneracy, the internet makes the white knighting even worse. These pathetic little men get together in their little echo chambers, and where once social disapproval would have kept their cowardly mouths shut, now they feed off one another, attacking their betters and pretending that they are the good guys. But just because the internet makes it worse doesn't mean this is a new problem. Quite frankly, the vile, cowardly behavior of the White Knight is a problem as old as our race. Adam and Eve. Adam, the perpetual beta male. Adam, the White Knight. When Eve sinned, when Eve ate the apple, she allowed herself to be misguided. She allowed herself to be tricked by the serpent. And that's woman's sin. Always allowing herself to be tricked into doing what she wants to do anyway. Adam, however, wasn't deceived. Adam wasn't tricked. He knew that they weren't supposed to eat the apple, and yet he did it anyway. Why? Because this wife that God had given him to cherish and guide and lead, he followed her. And following her, he followed her into sin. The White Knight is nothing new. To understand the psychology of the White Knight, it's once again useful to bring up the trifold nature of truth. The absolute, objective, and the relative level. On the absolute level of truth, when we look at the question of what guides your life, what are you living for? On the absolute level, that's where you find the Christian knight, and that's where you find the pagan stoic. The difference between the two is that the Christian knight lives with hope, lives with faith, has something bigger that he's fighting for. He's fighting for the kingdom of heaven. The stoic is only fighting for the certitude of the grave, but both men are placing something higher than themselves, something bigger, a higher principle to seek after. The stoic might die and rot in the earth, but he's going to live a life that's worth living. Both of them are pursuing the absolute. Both of them are beyond self-directed. They're pursuing something bigger than themselves. That is their direction. That is their guidance in life. Down at the objective level, you get the pagan hedonist, the person that pursues purely their own pleasure. If you've been following the recent divide between the Dark Enlightenment reactive sphere and the game bloggers, this is where the divide lies, is the reactionaries want to be at the absolute truth level, living for something bigger than oneself, while the game bloggers are living on the hedonist level, living for themselves. Now there's two things to note about these men. First of all, I wouldn't be so quick to rush to conclusions that they're at the objective level, that they're true pagan hedonists. Quite frankly, you can't be a Christian knight if there's no army to fight in. And given how badly the church has mangled our culture, how thoroughly the church has sold out and given in to the hedonism of society, desperately begging people to come to church and saying whatever they want to hear, whatever the women in the congregation want to believe, calling these supposed hedonists failures, I don't think that's quite fair. A lot of them, I think, are closet virtuous people. And second of all, even if they are a true pagan hedonist, a true hedonist, does have virtue. A hedonist lives for themselves. They're not living for the absolute. They're not living for principles and they're not living for God, but they are living for themselves. And that takes virtue. That takes courage. So even if they aren't living for the absolute, they're a heck of a lot closer to it than the bulk of people in society. And see, this is where we get down to the relative truth. This is where we find the white knight. The white knight doesn't have the understanding of principles to live for. He doesn't have the courage to live for himself. Instead, the white knight is the male that seeks somebody else to lead him. And so in this present feminist society, he seeks out a woman to lead him. He allows women to tell him what male virtue is, as if they could tell him anything about it. And they hold him in contempt for it, because instinctively women recognize male virtue. No, he's too cowardly to even live life on his own terms, to even be something as difficult as a man that pursues game, that pursues sex. He's not even courageous enough to be a hedonist. No, he is a slave. Somebody else dictates his morality for him, and he is happy handing his soul over to that other person. When you look at the white knight, you're looking at the sucker that supports the Nazi Party, the blind, obedient follower to communism, and the idiot voter that sells out his decision-making to whatever political party he wears on his sleeve. The white knight, that most cowardly of man, a blemish upon the countenance of the Lord. Irini out, folks.